Thanks so much for tuning in to the New Design for Living here on KONR Radio, Mondays at noon. This is a fairly new call-in talk show here at the station. We are coming together every Monday to radically reimagine the infrastructure of a new society. We are witnessing what we are witnessing. People use the word collapse, the collapse of our systems. But whatever words you use, we are seeing something very significant happen. And the New Design for Living is a vision. It has, spiritual components to it. It has societal and personal and professional components to it. It's the scaffolding of something new. And I'm delighted to welcome not just my special guest today, Kaleem Nuriddin, but also a very dear friend of mine, longtime spiritual colleague, longtime mentor, and somebody that I lean into when things are a bit cray-cray. So good to see you, my friend, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Camille.
You and I were having a conversation the other day, and it was a good one. It was a good one. And so at the end of it, I said to you, you need to come on my show and talk about this. I kind of want to start with you maybe describing to me what it is that you see going on out there in the world of effects. I use the word collapse, but tell me what you see.
Well, thank you, Camille, first of all. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk on this. As you know, yes, we had a very passionate discussion a few mornings ago. And what's going on? Well, I see this is part of our human evolution, is what I see. And I think we as human beings, as you know, I'm going to address this from the spiritual perspective, because this is what I think not only are we experiencing, but it's also, I think, is what the answer is. But we're evolving as human beings. We're evolving out of what I often speak of as animal consciousness. Sometimes people refer to it as reptile consciousness. Basically, and we are growing and evolving. And so what we see, we have both very wonderful, beautiful, loving things going on in the world. And obviously, we can see we have very challenging and brutal things going on in the world. So I just think it's really part of our human experience. And as we're evolving and growing to be the better expression of ourselves.
I would agree with that. And the question is, how can that be true if we find ourselves almost back to where we have started from, this very disconnected, primal consciousness of separation that justifies this extreme brutality that we are seeing being played out on the streets against American citizens? Mm-hmm. How is that assisting us in this ascension, this evolution?
Well, I think we're always at point of choice. I think as we as human beings, whatever we're experiencing in life, as we continue to evolve, we have to continue to make choices. But to continue to make the choice of whether we're going to devolve and revert back to how we used to do things, or we continue to move forward. So I think we're always at a point of choice. As you know, I often share with you how I've been around for a few decades, okay, as a young adult conscious back in the late 60s and 70s, and I've seen some horrendous things in the outer picturing of our society as a whole. And yet, I think we came through on the higher point than which we started. And just like anything else in life, there are big bumps in the road and sometimes craters in the road. And yet, it takes people with love, with devotion and dedicated vision to see past that and continue to act according to divine inspiration to move through and past these bumps in the roads and these craters in the road. There's more. So I don't want to minimize what we're going through right now, because it's a very historical time period we're experiencing.
Do you feel like you have seen anything like this? I know you've just talked about what you've been through, but do you see this being different in a way from that?
Well, I want to say this. I've read about things like this. I've experienced some things like this. But, of course, everything in history is unique in itself. As we do know, just as an example, there have been civil wars, citizens fighting against each other throughout the beginning of the time period. Even starts with our ancient scriptures, brother against brother, right? The Cain and Abel story. And here we are, again, our society. So as an example, I imagine my father has seen something like this during his time period. For example, being part of African-American experience. And I want to, and this is not just true for African-Americans, but I'm going to particularly refer to that since that's my cultural background. But can you imagine that, yes, you're walking down the street and people coming with hoods, covering their face and snatching you off, and your family never heard from you again. That was very common, and that was part of the experience of African Americans. And so these time periods, and we do know what happened in Germany during, it's all part of World War II. Not only in Germany, what happened with the Stalin and things like this. So these time periods have happened tragically from all the beginning of history, and we're experiencing something like that again. And there's hope, because I feel we also have because of history and because of our ability to learn from history, we have answers to it and we know what to do.
One of the things I want to do to help this conversation is something we do every Monday on the show, which is to help people understand a little bit more about what the new design model is all about. And it can be anchored into one basic principle, and that is the principle of oneness. That is the principle of unity consciousness. That is the principle of the interconnectivity of all life, versus the program that I came up out of, you and others have come up out of, what this whole situation is coming up out of, which is separation. Us and them, you and me, right or wrong. And as a result of my personal journey of journeying from separation into oneness, it's been a journey. It's been a process, because it has every aspect of my personal life and my professional life entangled in it. So when you start pulling the thread from that ball of yarn, turns out there's not a place where this thing doesn't affect. So what I'm seeing is the root cause of what I'm seeing is a consciousness of separation.
Absolutely.
The only way that you can do this to another person is because you have a consciousness that says, I'm not them. I can do this to them without having any consequences. It's happening to them. It's not happening to me. Look how obvious that is, right? That's the program of separation. And so one of the things that I was talking to you about the other day and earlier this morning is sometimes the conundrum I have, which is how do we apply this spiritual consciousness of oneness and this idea of you are my brother, I am your sister, inside the role of activist or activism?
Well, I think, number one, in every circumstance, we must strive to remember that we are one, regardless of the appearance of the behavior of how we look to each other. And so, as you know, that's one of the challenges. Am I going to be, if I choose the spiritual consciousness path, and I'm absolutely have dedicated my life to that, then I'm challenged at times. Okay, Kaleem, are you going to live by circumstances, or are you going to live spiritually, the spiritual truth of our oneness? And so I would say that the bottom line is that it requires me to remain in oneness, also requires personal accountability. I am also a part of, I often describe it, my personal philosophy is, we call it new thought or metaphysics. The meta means the spiritual realm. The physics means our everyday living, physical things. I think it is both meta and physical, so we don't divorce one from the other. So number two, though, and therefore I also have physical and social responsibilities. But the question is, what do I do? How do I remain in consciousness? Well, that's when we go to your particular, and I want to encourage, what I encourage everyone to do when people come to me for counseling or advice is always say, what is your particular spiritual or religious or philosophical value system? And you turn to that. And then the question is, are you able to live through this? Now, I also say once you turn to that, you be open to asking the question and responding to the answer, what is mine to do? So I believe we should be both contemplative, we should be both reflective about our values and constantly acting based upon inspired guidance of what we're to do.
One of the things that's interesting as I'm listening to you is what's going on inside my own head, because aside from what I believe and how I'm living, I tend to pick up what other people might be thinking as you're talking or any guest is talking. And so here we are inside of the actions that are coming out of a Christian nationalist philosophy, which sees a population of Caucasians, definitely Caucasian men and Caucasian women, though in a very submissive, reduced way, reduced value. And that's why I also like to talk about spirituality on the show, because it takes it out of that Sunday framework and puts it into everyday living, because I think people are trying to really understand what to do, how to deal with this. You know, a lot of people aren't dealing with it because life has them, has their full attention. They're raising kids, they've got jobs, they're just trying to get by. So that particular group may want to be engaged, may look at it on social media, but their lives doesn't allow for it, and I think you have varying degrees of what people are able to actually do with how they feel. We've got a King's Rally coming up on the 18th. And so my hope today, and just in the efforts of this show, is to just have these questions, not always because we have answers, but something happens when we live inside the question, because it's easy to say things, but then it's like, okay, but how? How do I implement this into my everyday living? I had an experience the other day. I was watching video about the flotilla that was arriving, trying to get to Gaza, and there was 40 ships and 400 people, and something just happened, and I realized, like, everything prior to that was taking me to my tipping point, but something about that story and the videos I was watching and the Israeli soldiers coming onto the ships and, arresting people just tipped me over the edge. And I just thought, wow, these people have left their everyday life to go do this. What would more courage look like in my life? What would being more brave take me towards that maybe I'm not at now? I don't necessarily have the answer, but I felt like in that moment, that night, just saying that out loud was part of the process of knowing what maybe that action is.
Okay, as you mentioned that situation, what comes to my mind is a book by Martin Luther King, and I think he gave a sermon in this called The Strength to Love. That takes courage. And I think in the midst of all this experience, the question is, am I choosing to remain in love and to act from love? Now remember, because oftentimes people, when you hear the word love, it sounds passive. But in my mind, and I speak from the I, love is active. So we have examples like the Martin Luther King Jr., who actively moved from a point of love. We have individuals like the Gandhis who actively moved out of love, and we call this thing called oneness. And we have individuals who, throughout history, who acted out of love, which means they had certain skills and talents. They were called to be attorneys or doctors. And for example, we'll take the attorneys. And they were acted out of courage and love to move to the court system to resolve issues. So the question is, we have to me, the biggest question about courage, do I have enough courage to maintain love? And I'll give you another example. Martin Luther King Jr. during that time period. Of course, I wasn't personally involved in myself. I've been in similar experiences. But you can imagine right in the middle of a demonstration, a non-violent action demonstration. You're being attacked by the authorities, police officers with dogs, et cetera. And yet you've maintained the strength to love. And you maintain to see the very person who's sticking that dog on you. And you're struggling with and working toward and stay focused on, and they are my fellow human being. They're my fellow brother and sisters, right? To me, that's the greatest courage. And from that courage will become creative action, as we've experienced many times in history. What more can you say what happened in South Africa? Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, and of course, they're representing hundreds and thousands of other people. But these are icons, right? They maintained the vision. They maintained the strength and to pull it off. So in the midst of all this struggle, one of our biggest challenges, those of us who are spiritually, consciously based, is to maintain the strength to love, maintain the focus of oneness as we take inspired action.
Okay, and so someone says, what's the point? We were nonviolent, we had fierce love, we held that vibration, we were in oneness, and it seems to have only amplified the violence. Now, how would you answer that question?
And we also must acknowledge that there has been tremendous progress. And part of being a mature, once again, and I'm going to call it spiritual maturity, right? Because, for example, I was 21 years old at a time period. I didn't have the same understanding I have today. I was 30 years old. In 40 years, I had a little more understanding. But part of the maturity is the understanding that it's consistent and persistent work. We don't accomplish it and lay down. We can see right now how we have to be persistent.
Because in the old design model, none of this is valued. So when you're in the old design model and you're seeing the brutality on the streets, we're seeing this executive order now that, basically says if you're caught being anti-Christian, anti-capitalist, and against American values, which is as generic as they would want it to be, you're deemed a terrorist. Now they're scouring our social media pages and they're looking for us, right? They're looking for us. When you're in that model and you apply this oneness, principle-based approach and activism, it doesn't seem to do much but what it does in the moment. But when you step out of that design model and not even be in it to try to heal it from within it, and you step into a new way, a way that we're creating in real time without instructions, following the heart like you're talking about, striving to integrate our values and our maturity in a new version of ourselves, I find myself less engaged in what is happening and more engaged in designing something that is new. Share a little bit about what you're hearing me say and what that might bring up for you.
What I'm hearing you saying that we each must take personal responsibility for the moment that we're in. This is our time period now. This is the moment we're in. And so it's not like, as I mentioned a moment ago, the work is never done. We're constantly striving for, as they say in our Constitution, a more perfect union. More perfect means this is a continuous work, and it's passed on from generation to generation. And just like we build a house, if you don't, as you maintain it or as you don't maintain it, it will fall apart. And what do? We have to continually work to maintain it and to make it more beautiful. So that's the vision we should have. But I think part of I know, and I'm speaking from my own personal life, I do know how, you being sort of like a true believer when I was a younger person, and I thought, boy, we're just going to accomplish some things, and this is the way it's going to be forever. That is absolutely not true. It's sustained work, sustained consciousness, and sustained moving forward. At the same time, give ourselves credit. We have made progress. And this is where the hope and sustainability comes from. We don't get lost in thinking we have not made tremendous progress. We're sitting here talking on this radio station right now that may not have happened 50 years ago. Remember now, right here in the city of Anchorage, some 50 or so years ago, African Americans were having their homes burnt down right here in our neighborhoods. But it's not happening today necessarily, right? But what happened? Individuals, the pioneers who came before us, they strived, and they acted, and they did some work. So we made progress. Now the vast majority of us can live in the neighborhoods we want to live in without the consequences of having our homes burnt. And then it appears like here we are again. Well, guess what we have to do? We have to stay on duty and continue to push forward.
Well, okay. Well, by the way, 907-222-1061 is the phone number. Jump in, share your thoughts about what we're talking about. Kaleem Nuriddin is my guest today. But you're talking about houses burning down, but the South Carolina Judge Goodstein had her house burnt to the ground. Her husband, her son, and a guest were inside. She was walking the dog. They're all in the hospital now, and she denied the administration's desire, this is a very generic way of saying it without legal terms, to basically allow the DOJ to have access to our personal information, the citizens of that state. So for me, this is very mafia. Like, this is very mafia, right? Like, you're not doing what I want to do. You're fired and replaced with somebody who is. Like, this is about loyalty. This is because they're beyond the law now. They are beyond the law. They're beyond separation of power. So sometimes what I struggle with is, what's the point of being in the container and following the rule of law and thinking that this is going to get better with regards to separation of power, the Constitution, when they are way past that. They're further down the road than anybody would have imagined this short into a new administration. How does somebody feel? How do you feel able to, and the young people in your life, how are you able to make that a realistic balance to what we're seeing and what we're talking about today?
Well, it reminds me, it's like anything in life, is like I'm kind of repeating myself at this point, I'm thinking, but this has happened before, Camille. and we have resolved, we temporarily resolved it, and we're going to do this again. But I'm going to refer back to the music that I asked you to play, Wake Up Everybody, okay? I think what it requires is that everybody to wake up and to continue to ask yourself what is mine to do. In the song, he talks about wake up everybody. He talks about there's a role for teachers to play, for preachers to play, a role for doctors to play. So each one of us, when we go within and take our time to ask ourselves what is mine to do, we will know what action we're supposed to take into this. Now, but I want to constantly remind ourselves, though, if we want to make sustained progress and to build a more perfect union, I recommend, when I'm devoted to it, is that we do it out of love. Now, action out of love. Now, I didn't say passivity, right? For some individuals, it's going to appear like they're passive. Why? Because they're doing things in a quiet way, in their own particular way. I'm one who believes in the power of prayer, because I believe prayer inspires us and inspires other people while I'm praying for them, while I'm praying for myself and others. So I believe what it may appear passive to one individual, they're actively praying. Then there are some individuals who are not even thinking about prayer at all, but for some reason they're inspired to take action, and they're doing it. As I mentioned, we have lawyers, we have doctors, we have teachers, we have engineers, we have everybody in your role. So you'll be called to go to a march. You'll be called to do something right. You'll be called to do justice in your personal way or as a collective movement. But I think, once again, wake up everybody. Each one of us are going to be called in our personal way.
This is, and the other thing I want to say about the new design for living is it is a culmination of my personal experience, certainly back in 2017, starting in July when I did my 100-day meditation experiment. That's my sea change moment. I meditated for an hour every day for 100 days. I picked up my phone when I came out of the meditation and just recorded myself. It was a challenge from a New York Times bestselling author, Kyle Cease, at the time. That transformation was permanent. It was cellular. And what I understood as a result of that journey will always be with me. It has guided me from that point to this point now. And that began my process inside the topic of change and transformation. I became very curious about it, coupled with my own spiritual philosophy and my values and all of that. And so here's the new design for living now that's kind of coming through me as much as it's coming from me, because it really is a vision. And a vision is not necessarily something you ask for, because it's a lot of responsibility.
Absolutely.
And it also has to work you over first. At least that's my experience. It's like, well, you can't go out and be talking about this until you can talk about it from your own personal experience. So we're going to take care of that for you. And the last several years, if not longer, have done just that. And that is why I like doing these kinds of conversations on the air, because I'm in real time with it too. It's not like somebody's given us instructions like they have in the past that says this is the formula. I mean, to some degree, there is something emerging as the formula, certainly in this conversation. But I just really want to stress that if you're in the old design model and you're hearing what we're saying, you're probably your mind's going to conclude that it's not going to work. And that's true, because the old design model is etched in its own frequency. It's etched in its own outcome. It's got its own script, its own characters. It's not necessarily interested in unity consciousness. That's why I think one of the most important things we can do is to step out of that and walk alongside it. Not to avoid it, not to be engaged with it, but for me, at some point, I just realized I don't see how what I value that's not valued is going to make a difference in that old way.
And I propose this, Camille. There's always been the new design. The new design is actually very old, okay? Because as you keep things in the historical context, the vast majority of human living has been very savage. I'll refer to the scriptures again. From the very beginning, we're murdering brother, then tribe murdering tribe, then nations murdering nations. We've been doing this all along. And there's always been a new designer who stepped forth and called for peace. And let's just use Jesus as an example. And this is true in every culture, in every place on the planet Earth. There's been someone and it's always not. We often end up seeing historically a person or two, but the truth is that there's many people behind the scenes praying and being called to bring about a new design. But just imagine back in Jesus' time period, 2,000 years ago, occupy your nation, your culture occupied by a foreign force called the Roman Empire at that time, right? And they were under oppression. And yet there were a group of people. There was a man named Jesus, and we call him Jesus today in English, all right? And there was, so once again, it was a new design. What was the new design? Rather than eye for an eye, he says, it's a new way, and I call you to love. And he was taking action. He wasn't simply sitting in a hut, just meditating. He took action, teaching that and acting on that. All right, but that was a new design for living. Why? We were not accustomed to looking for the good, looking to love your enemy. They're looking to destroy my enemy, as someone said recently, right? But there's always somebody with that new, as you indicated, new design for living. Someone has always caught that glow, inspiration that I call from the infinite. Some people call it God, you call it spirit. But some bodies and some people have always been that spark. Why? Because I believe it's an infinite spark that is dormant or active in each one of us. Now the question is, who's going to call it forth? When you're called personally, did you answer to the call? You're saying yes, and as John Lennon says, we're not the only ones.
And this is probably a good time to say that both Jesus and John Lennon were assassinated in their own way, right? So it's not a good...
Right.
It's not a good backstory to the ending.
And we're living off the fruits of their labor.
Of course.
And remember now, and there were thousands of people during that same time period who did not die that way.
Yeah,
and
of course.
And they did live and have and live to have a natural death. Once again, I'm saying these personalities are historical icons, but behind all of them were hundreds and thousands of individuals who caught the same flame.
Yeah, and I also want to make note that in the old design model, the women who were equal, people like Mary Magdalene, were completely dismissed. They were literally erased from storytelling. And that's something else that's happening right now that I'm also very passionate about, the divine feminine that is rising. I feel that a lot of that power and that balance is very necessary these days.
And I think by us knowing this, and this is really important, through spiritual consciousness, what we have the choice of doing is looking for the good in the middle of the appearance of darkness, looking for the light.
But you know what's hard? Well, I'm just going to jump in because you know what's hard? What was hard for me this week is, and somebody said, "Oh, it sounds like it's guilt." It wasn't guilt. It was awareness that it just was really hard. It's getting harder to look for the good when I'm seeing the brutality. Like my heart is breaking. I mean, I do what I do, and I have to up-level it because it's not taking care of me, and I know that means I need to do more of it. But I am very sidelined sometimes by the horrific brutality. And I just think to myself, my gosh, what have these people convinced themselves? I mean, I know the answer to the question that would make them be able to go home at night and lay their heads down and say that was a good day's work. Like, we're talking about the population group that has the most privileged, Caucasian men. And yet something is still not enough for them that they would be out on the streets. It's obviously not all, but that is the majority of the population of ICE agents and these other people that are taking up American citizens. Yeah. I mean, I know enough. I've been through enough to understand that where I'm at right now today talking is part of my spiritual evolution myself, that I have to touch on the bottom sometimes to have a new place to rise to. But it is hard. It is really hard to watch what's happening and to feel very hopeless and helpless and to feel like, I can answer the question, what's mine to do? And here I am doing it on a Monday afternoon as a volunteer, broadcaster on a local radio station. And yet we yearn to see something turn towards our way. And instead, every day it seems to be turning more towards the other way.
Right. And just knowing that your work is valuable and it is effective and it is part of the answer. As an example, let's remember this now. Well, what are some things we can do? Number one, I'm inspired by, of course, an individual who is one of the many individuals who've inspired me, but a major inspiration for me is Dr. Ernest Holmes. And of course, he was the founder of what we call today the Centers for Spiritual Living. And I can quote from him: "We are not meant to be doormats." Now, what does that mean to me? Now, that may mean different things to different people. What does it mean to me? Is that there are boundaries. And then the question is, how do we set the boundaries? And what do we do in terms of boundaries? Well, I think when we said, number one, we know in civil law, we do not allow individuals to go around hurting individuals, right? We have laws, and we get together as a community, and we enact laws to protect us. Now, the question is, though, how do I respond to the one who seemed to be the offender out of enlightened consciousness? Because I do know I have a choice. I can respond eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, and as Gandhi says, we'll end up with a world that is blind and toothless. We know where that goes. Or I can take the other route. What's the other route? It's number one, I got to contain, right? We contain individuals who we feel is disturbing society or harming other people. And then once we contain them, we want to go through a healing process. Okay, we call it, some groups, we call it restorative justice or reconciliation. There's different ways we do this. And that's when we each ask ourselves, what is mine to do? Now, so therefore, a loving approach does not mean I'm passive. It means I may be called to execute some boundaries. I may be called to execute some containment. But realize, though, it's sustainable. I can't just stop. It's just contained. I now must go a step further, healing, reformation, reconciliation. So those of us who know this game and know the truth of our human evolution, this is what we're dedicated to do.
Well, and this thing about love, like I've said this many times, in the new design model, this is a fierce love. Mm-hmm. Like in the old design model, love and peace, it's just, woo-woo, and it's never going to happen. But that is not truth at all. In the new design model, you can't get any power more powerful, more fierce, more incredible than love, and I'm so glad that my journey has taught me how to love. And along with Dr. Ernest Holmes, there is one person who really taught me, and that is the great Ram Dass. And it was a cassette that I had, great cassettes. And I can remember listening to him tell many stories in that one tape I had. But at some point in his storytelling, he said, I love you. You're a liar, a cheat, and a thief. And I love you. I can't play with you, and I love you. And that was a game changer for me because I came out of a background that intertwined love with proximity, love with physicality, love with active relationships. You went back in, you were loyal, family, blood over water, like all of those really deeply ingrained beliefs and principles that I grew up in. And when I heard him say that resonated. I mean, even now as I'm speaking about it, that was everything because it helped me get in alignment with who I am, someone who is here to love. And also, as I've been growing in my adulthood, understanding the importance of boundaries, understanding how to draw boundaries, understanding what they mean, what happens when you do it. And so I just want to bring that out because when we're talking about love as you are today, it's good to remember you can love and you forgive, and you can still keep your distance, and you can still choose not to have active or interaction with those individuals. Again, a new way versus the old way that said, go back in, keep loving, when it really is not healthy or appropriate.
And I'm going to say this, too. It depends on what you're called to do, okay? For example, it is appropriate. Sometimes I need to separate myself from what I consider to be the offender, where that may be. And then there's some of us who are called, you know what? And I'm going to also remember, I don't, this is I'm speaking from the I and from my personal philosophy. I am going to stick to this oneness thing. Mm-hmm. I do not want to play the game that they become the other.
Right.
Because once they become the other, in my personal opinion and philosophy, I've lost the game. I've now become them. That was I was fighting against. So at some point, I want to reconnect. That's where the restorative justice comes in. That's where the reconciliation comes in at. Mm-hmm. And that's a phase, that's a stage. It happens gradually or step by step. But obviously, just imagine as a parent, right? I'm going to use this analogy. If I have two children who I love them both, and one seems to be constantly offending the other, or they're squabbling. Now, as a parent, I'm going to separate them so they're no longer harming each other. Mm-hmm. But I don't leave it there. Now I need to engage with them to bring out reconciliation and to evolve and to grow so we're no longer going through the squabble. So we have sustainable relationships and harmony and peace and respecting each other. So to me, there's a method, there's many methods of reconciliation. One of it is remember, at some point, I need to re-engage if appropriate, or maybe send another party to re-engage. So I'm talking about from both a personal and or society point of view. There are different people with different skills and talents and soul callings that are designed to go through. But most important is, what is mine to do? It's not designed for everybody to do everything. But as a collective society, as a village, we have somebody among us who can go the extra mile for the reconciliation, the healing of the individual.
Well, and that's why that song "Wake Up" is so appropriate. And in the new design model, we do have great reverence for the ancient teachings that is astrology, and it is a super full moon, harvest moon today, and the theme is courage. For me, it's either all spirit or no spirit at all. So in the new design model, we have just great reverence for the language of what really this is. When we talk about the astrological metaphors and stories that are above us in the cosmos, in the heavens. And the idea that this particular full moon's theme is courage is no accident. I mean, it's absolutely powerful to me how supported we can be. The signs and the information are everywhere. You simply have to be open to them. And when you experience them, to take them in. I mean, I remember getting in the beginning of my spiritual, path, I would say I was open to the answer to my question, but I really had my fingers in my ear. Go ahead, I'm listening.
Exactly.
You don't want to hear it. You're dealing with, the death of your ego. And all of that. Kaleem Nuriddin is my guest today. We're talking about what's happening in our country, what's happening in our relationships, what is just happening, and how do we navigate through it that takes us towards what has been described as the promised land, what has been described as the new earth, and certainly for me, the new design for living. 907-222-1061. That's our phone number. The lines are open. By all means, jump in and have a conversation with my special guest as well. Now, I know this story. There was a president that I think that when George Bush was president, you were face to face with this final, perhaps, reckoning of otherness and oneness. And you were very open about that journey because you weren't feeling it in the beginning. Can you talk a little bit about that, where you were, where you found yourself, and what it took to move yourself to where you are today, this place of oneness? Because it wasn't always that way.
Well, so first of all, and I want to share this with you because you mentioned there, and I'll get back to my story, but you mentioned also there's individuals who are doing things that we feel are, even though they're acting in the name of the law enforcement, we feel some people may feel they're acting out of immorality or not moral.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to say this, and then this is part of my story. Once I have committed myself to living spiritually, which means I have committed, and what this means to me, I'm speaking from the I as Kaleem, right? What it means to me is that I am convinced that we are one. There is no other. And you are me. We're expression of the infinite, and we're individual expression of the infinite. And when I see you act out, I'm acting out.
Right.
I believe there was someone who said, whatever you do to the least of these, you're doing to me. Okay? New thought, right? New design for living. Okay?
Right.
Now, the question is, when I see someone doing something and I have this thing inside of me that seems, now I want to label them, I want to curse them, I want to talk all about the evil they're doing, and it's not, remember now, their behavior might be totally inappropriate. But yet, if I get to label that person, am I staying in my spiritual consciousness of oneness? That's what I was challenged with now decades ago, fortunately, right? In which I was challenged in labeling, right? And then what happened for me, though, a mirror kept popping up. Kaleem, if you're feeling that way about that person, what does it say about you?
I gotta go.
Okay.
Fingers in the air.
Exactly. Okay. And then, of course, you back off, right, emotionally. But in that time period of my life, I was deep into spiritual practice as well. Deep into praying and meditating. And what happens, of course, you go through what's called a purification process, in which the things that you did so easily an X time period ago, you can no longer do again. So just a long story short, as they say, right? eventually I had to get to the point where, you know what, I began to pray for that personality.
Well, I want to go back to the question that was proposed to you through your own spirit, which is, if you're feeling that way about that person, what is it saying about you? So what was your, tell me about the realization of what it was saying about you.
Yes. Okay. What it's saying about me was that they are me, therefore there's some aspect of what they're doing, maybe some aspect of what I'm doing. Right? So remember, I'm going to keep falling back probably on the great teacher Jesus, in the sense that's the most probably well-known teacher of the way, the way of peace, right, and recognition, is that some things are done outwardly, so we can always see the behavior of that. Some things are done inwardly with thoughts and feelings, right? And so even though one person might be bombing someone with bombs as nature, but am I bombing someone with the words of my mouth and my behavior and my everyday life?
Right.
Okay?
Am I at war in my own heart and in my own mind with another?
Exactly.
And this is important work.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that is the whole point of this moment, is really waking people up or creating the atmosphere. As I said recently to somebody, I really I can't get anybody to do anything. All I can do is get as aligned with who I am as I possibly can, because, congruency is my word. Action, word, deed, thought, trying to be as aligned as possible. And the only thing I can really do is maintain that. And that creates an atmosphere, just like you create an atmosphere. And by creating that atmosphere, we give more people the opportunity to be activated.
Absolutely.
In their own process of awakening. I don't know who, I don't know when, but I know it's possible, because when you were holding your atmosphere, that allowed me to have my activation that has been decades long of awakening out of the trance that I was in, awakening out of the programming that I had agreed to, even if it was unconscious. Like it was a process of unentangling myself. Then you unentangle yourself and you're like, oh man, holy smokes. Like I can't believe all that. And here you are in between something that you've left and something that you don't know yet. So I just always like to remind everybody, it's a process.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you're blessed with an instantaneous process. I've had those. But for most of us, and this thing that's going on out here in the streets and in our country and in the world is giving us great agitators. And I hope today that if you're listening, you're feeling that agitation within yourself, and you're hearing that by asking yourself the question, what is mine to do, your own soul, your own heart is going to respond in a way that you'll understand. And sure, it may stretch you. It may take you out of your comfort zone. And let's hope it does. But you're not alone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you have young people in your life. How are they dealing with all this?
Some of them feel unaffected by it altogether, and some of them are looking for us. And then guess what? I look to them for inspiration, because you mentioned the fact that when we change within ourselves, we become influencers for other people as well. Because once again, when I change, I create a certain vibration about me, and I can then contribute. So what do? So once we be realigned, and I'm going to get back to the point, right? And I pray for individuals who they're very individual, or the so-called, would used to be the others. I'm now praying for them. What happens, that helps. I'm really praying for myself first, right? I choose not to live that way. I choose not to think about what I was thinking about that person as being part of my life, right? Then because I'm creating a whole group of people who are the others. But when I begin to pray and purify my own thoughts and my own vibrations, then I believe I become an influence like others have influenced me to vibrate higher, right? That's why we talk about these different. Now, so what do we do with individuals? Well, for example, we have these beautiful teachings for all different philosophies, as you know, and in the particular faith tradition I'm involved in, we honor all religious paths, and we look for the strain, that golden strain that moves through them all. And one of it is this thing called love, and so what we do then what happens, then you'll be inspired how to act. As an example, what did Martin Luther King do? He really, and this is my, and I think it's pretty well documented, but this is my interpretation, right? There were two things he was clear on as part of his faith tradition: was strength to love. I got to keep striving toward loving the individual. Number two, we have a social agreement called the Constitution, okay? And do we take time to listen to each other? So, because you talk listening, right? So all the others, the so-called other, do I really understand why they're acting that way? I'm so happy that somebody prayed for me when I was in different phases of life. I'm so happy somebody asked me questions and listened to me, allowed me to hear what I was saying, okay? And also to offer and to have some feedback, but also starts with listening. And so we have an agreement called the Constitution. We have some moral agreements. So I think what's wrong with us? No, what's wrong with us? We have the opportunity to call each other and let's discuss, have civil debate about what different parts of our Constitution, what does it mean to us? Let's have civil debate about our moral values and what does it mean to us? If I call myself a certain faith, am I really living those principles or am I really mouthing the principles? So, for example, if I call myself, for example, a Christian, am I actually following the way of Jesus or am I just talking about it?
I'm thinking about the people who had their apartment raided and the men, women, and children whose hands were zip-tied. And I sometimes feel like it's a privilege to be able to have conversations because I'm not being arrested or zip-tied. You know, and I always want to make sure that, as you can tell, I'm in a good space right now of something is going on for me internally. I know I've been around this moment before because my mind is just like, oh, well, yeah, sure. We have the privilege of discussing things because the tsunami hasn't, knocked our house down. But is that really the answer? And it goes back to what you said earlier, which is that everything is the answer. And because I have been called since January and I've not yet done it. And last night it was, I had all the Camilles at the table and they're like, well, now are you going to do it now? Which I just have this desire to have a community gathering. I just have a desire. Just let's get together, and let's have these kinds of conversations. Let's have this because it does come down to local. It does come down to community. It does come down to what is happening in our own backyard. If for people who are feeling like they can't affect what's going on, turn towards your own backyard. There's so many people in Anchorage right now that need support, so many nonprofits whose funding has been cut. There's no shortage of ways in which you can take your time, your attention, your love, and apply it somewhere locally that would greatly benefit from that. So I always like to remind myself and others that there's opportunities right here in our own backyard. I have to be able to be real in real time with what's going on inside me. I would say lately just something clicked over and a whole new container kind of spilled out that I'm getting a lot of help with from you today. Kaleem Nuriddin is my guest. So you've talked about prayer. I know that we both do what we call affirmative prayer, which is basically rearranging your thinking because you understand that thoughts and feelings are creative. That's one of the great gifts that we have. And so we rearrange our thinking so that it falls on the quality, the vibration, the outcome that we most desire. We're not begging to something, outside of ourselves. What are some other things that maybe you could share with us that people could do that would be in alignment with what you're talking about today?
Well, number one, I believe, now I'm kind of repeating what I said before, but I think it bears repeating, because this is really, in my opinion, my strong and devoted opinion, this is part of the answer. We need to go back to our moral values. There are certain things, as I was saying, even though the feelings I had about a certain politician, say decades ago now, because of my moral values, it challenged me. I could not continue to think about that because I was devoted to my moral values. See my point? And so I think we need to remind ourselves about moral values. If I call myself, for example, I'm part of a New Thought, Centers for Spiritual Living, and we teach about oneness and that everybody and that the infinite presence of God expressed to each individual. So how could I hold these thoughts against that individual if I'm going to live these values? I would challenge individual and honor your faith path, but go back to the basics of your moral values. Let's say I'm going to use Christianity as the example. Not only what would Jesus do, what did Jesus do? He gave a beautiful example, and I think it was called the Good Samaritan. Yes, the story of the Good Samaritan. And that really applies, and here's my point. Let's take our moral values, let's apply it to everyday real living. So, for example, many of us are concerned about life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. That's an agreement that we have under our Declaration of Independence. How does that relate to my moral values? Well, first of all, if I believe in life for myself, do I believe in life for my neighbor? As Jesus taught, your neighbor is you. In the Good Samaritan, he gave an imperfect example of an individual who had fallen. He had been basically robbed and beat up, left to the side of the road. Then the question was, who's going to come to his aid? Well, all the people who was part of his particular culture passed him by because of the risk that they may be involved in something and have their own safety threatened. As you were saying, Camille, how many of us are passing by circumstances in our life today and we're not being involved? Wake up, everybody. What is yours to do? So the example that Jesus gave, the very people as part of his so-called neighbors, his culture, they passed him by. Who was one that stopped to help him? It was one of his cultural others, a Samaritan, who they called dogs. They were unwanted. They were talked down to, on the untouchable society. That person stopped to help him. Because the question that Jesus was answering to a group of his disciples, a group of people, who are our neighbors, who are connected to us, who are we one with? So he gave an example of an other. And then now this other now, so how does it apply, Kaleem? How does it apply, Camille, to everyday living? We're concerned about health care in our society. This is part of a discussion going on in our world today. Well, Jesus gave you a perfect example. That other took care of that person, took him to an inn to be cared for, his medical needs cared for, and he said, whatever this person needs to be cared for, I'll pay for it. So that other gave of himself for a so-called the other person, right? The other person who's down, right? The people who are my enemy. So this is a beautiful living example of how we can apply our morals in our everyday living. Am I concerned about my neighbor? Will I give of myself? Do I mind paying my tax to help for the health care of others? That's what Jesus proposed.
Well, okay. and I respect where you're coming from, and I respect your philosophy, and I also want to say that when we use the word morals or morality, even because if you're not spiritual, if you're not religious, you don't need to be, because if you simply agree with the idea of the interconnectivity of all life, if you agree with oneness, if you agree that back behind the appearance of skin and bones, we're all coming out of the same manufacturing site, right? Like we're all breathing the same air. We're all on the same planet, because you know what I'm saying? I don't want morality to be couched only in spiritual terms and only in religious terms, because though they offer guideposts and compass direction for such a topic and such an idea and ideal, there's other ways to arrive there as well. Right. And I'm hearing you say how you've arrived there.
And how we live it out.
In
the physical and social life.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Kaleem Nuriddin. Okay. Super appreciate it. You can find Kaleem over at the Alaska Center for Spiritual Living, where he gives a lot of talks. They're on YouTube as well. And though you don't consider yourself a community leader, I would say you are an influencer.
Okay.
So this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Camille.
Yeah, I super appreciate it. Thanks so much for tuning in. You can find all my shows at Podbean. Just search either Camille Conte or The New Design for Living. Take good care of yourself.